My name is Dr. Tammy Nelson. I'm a sex and relationship therapist, and then I've been doing this for about 35 years. I'm certified, and I'm a board certified sexologist, and I'm a certified sex and couples therapist, and I'm the founder and director of the Integrative Sex Therapy Institute. So I train other therapists to be sex and couples therapists. And I have a podcast, The Trouble with Sex. I have a TEDx talk about the new monogamy. And I'm the author of 6 books, not including my ebooks. And I have a card deck called Date Night Card Deck.
That sounds like fun.
It's fun. It just came out and I really love it. I'll send you a deck. I'll send you the link.
Oh,
My most recent book is Open Monogamy, a guide to co-creating your ideal relationship agreement.
wow. That's so incredible.
Thank you.
You're a real seasoned expert and professional in this field. I have to ask you, what drew you in?
Well, I think I was a therapist first, and then I was a couples therapist, and then I became a sex therapist because in the training to be a therapist, like they don't really talk about sex. That to be a couples therapist, they don't talk about sex, which is interesting because it's not like we're working with roommates. So I wrote Getting the Sex You Want, which is based on a type of couples therapy, imago therapy, imago relationship therapy. So I sort of combined couples therapy with talking about how to have better sex because it wasn't really in the zeitgeist then in psychotherapy land. And then I thought, people don't really talk about affairs either and how to heal from affairs. And there's a lot of polarity and blame. And so I wrote The New Monogamy, which was how to create your ideal relationship agreement after infidelity. And then I wrote When You're the One Who Cheats, because I think we have a tendency to focus on sort of the betrayal trauma of what it's like to be cheated on, but we don't really look at what was the purpose of the affair in the relationship. So I feel like I have written about the things that I needed to learn, and I have sort of trained people in the ways that I wanted to learn. And the field of sex and couples therapy, I think, is opening up and it's widening to be more diverse and explore and encompass more things, but we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I love the fact that, you've written on and researched and worked on things that you have this personal interest in as well, because I think it makes for more meaningful work usually. And it's interesting because to your point, I interviewed the founder of Sex Coach U.
Oh yeah, Patty Britton.
Patty, yeah. And she said that she started that specifically for what you're talking about, which is that so many professionals do not get any training when it comes to sex.
No, it's so true.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's just a society restriction. Like it's just reflective of society at large that people don't talk about sex. There's a lot of guilt and shame. And, we have since the beginning of time, the idea of pleasure is sinful and particularly female pleasure. So, Eve destroyed humanity by following her pleasure by eating the damn apple. So, it sort of began with that idea that following your pleasure, being free to live in your pleasure in the Garden of Eden was going to, uh, it was so evocative that it would swing over to the side of danger, and that pleasure therefore is equated with something dangerous and sinful and something to be ashamed of and hidden and secretive, and that it has the power to destroy us. And so the message is pretty clear. Like if you're going to do anything that's pleasurable, you better hide it and keep it a secret, not tell anybody. And the more you hide it and keep it a secret, don't tell anybody, the more it becomes something to be ashamed of. So it's not so much that it's private. There's a difference between privacy and secrecy, right? It's that private is like something I can do because I don't want to do it in front of other people. It's why you and I have clothes on right now. But the secrecy makes it sound like there's something horribly, horribly wrong with what I'm doing. And so, um, there's no place else that it's so profound than in the world of psychotherapy, because we have a tendency to pathologize what we think is wrong or outside of the norm. And so, Eve would have been a great patient to have in therapy. We could have really supported her in her journey.
I love that. And as you're talking, what really sticks out to me, and particularly in your example of Eve, following her pleasure and she ate the apple, which just flipped everything upside down, is that nature or God or evolution, whatever you believe in, gave women this organ that is all about, and as far as we know, only for pleasure, the clitoris, right? So it's interesting that nature itself seems to support women's pleasure, but we as a society are extremely uncomfortable with it.
Oh, I think it's more than uncomfortable. I think you're absolutely right. I think to the point where we will take away anything, any kind of right to even our own bodies. So, the regression in our culture right now about taking away women's right to reproduction and to abortion, like all that stuff is just code for you're having sex and you're a bad girl. And so, because people know on some deep level that pleasure is power. So if we were to embrace pleasure and really honor that that's where our power lives, I mean, we have the power to reproduce and perpetuate the species. So if we were to embrace that that's where the power is, we could take over the planet. And so the terror of that, the existential terror of that we might be like rising into power, means that there is an equal and opposite reactivity, which is like, oh no, we're gonna take that away from you. We're gonna smash you down. It's sort of like the reactivation of Eve. I think we've gone through this many times. The good news is that in this incarnation they can't burn us. At least not yet. At least not in this country. They still do that in other countries, but in this country they can't burn us for being in touch with our pleasure and our power. And we, as much as there's repression in this country, and particularly if you're, LGBTQIA plus, we still can have a voice. So depending on where you are in the country, depending on where you are in your own body, we do have free speech. At least some of us feel like we do. And maybe it's becoming more of a privilege than we realize, but we can talk about it. You and I can have this conversation and not go to jail. And so there is power in talking about and encouraging each other to be in pleasure and not pathologize that conversation.
Really powerful what you just said. I want to ask you something that I kind of have noticed as I've done these interviews with experts such as yourself. Many experts that I interview that have really been studying human sexuality for a significant chunk of time seem to include a spiritual component.
That's interesting.
And I'm curious if it's your research and your experience with patients and clients that has almost led you to seeing this spiritual component in all of this, or if you yourself have just always had that within yourself and you view things through that lens.
It's interesting. That's a really interesting observation. I'm not sure. Like I think in a way there's a connection between being in your voice around acknowledging that there's there's more out there in the universe than meets the eye, and that there, for all of us, we have sort of a mission. There's like a dharma thing that you're supposed to be doing in the world, and if you're doing it or not doing it because it keeps pushing you back on the path. You're like, I don't want to do this anymore, this is too hard. And the world keeps going, well, too bad. This is what you're going to do. And I think talking about that and having the freedom to talk about uh, the bigger force in the universe is sort of like finding the freedom to talk about sexuality. Like, the reality of sexuality is common to all humans. Like, even mammals have sex. We're the only mammal that eroticizes sexuality. We have this extra part around sex that is not necessarily explainable. And so it may be that as sex therapists, like, we know that sex is more than just being in your body and putting tab A into slot B and pushing the right buttons. Like, there's something else going on. I mean, sex is so many things, including energetic. And so maybe there's that, or maybe people who are a little bit more intrigued by the mystery are more drawn to edgy things. I'm not sure, but that's interesting to think about. I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I have actually really started to notice this, and it's really interesting to me. So I'm like, I have to ask because it's it's pretty significant.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm a ketamine therapist, and I've done like trainings in psychedelics like MDMA therapy, and MDMA is not legal yet, but ketamine is. And I find it fascinating that, because I treat sexuality, I also work with trauma and sexual trauma. And the newest and latest and cutting edge treatments are really psychedelics and ketamine to treat trauma. And I find that it's not so much that it's psychedelic, but it's expanded consciousness medication, so that you realize, like, there's more to life than what you think. And so you learn to change the narrative about what's happening. Not necessarily, you can't change what's already happened in the past, but you can change how you think about it. And that, now we know, for the first time in history, we have proof that actually changes your brain. Like, our brain is plastic, and it actually shifts, or like the shapes actually shift in your brain as you change how you think about something. And that in and of itself is fascinating to me. Like, maybe, we're all moving into a little bit more of an expanded consciousness, because as we become aware of these new medicines and how they give us new insight into healing. And I think that is like a new frontier, and that's just going to be a revolution in treating sexuality and relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, because it's from that expanded, more whole point of view. I'm curious if in your 35 years you have seen very recurrent themes or blocks to sexual wellness in your patients.
Well, there's a couple things. If we talk about relationships, there's a couple different silos. If we think about individuals, I think shame and anxiety. It's really, anxiety is a vasovagal constrictor. So in other words, it prevents blood flow to your extremities. And so it's really hard to have an orgasm, for instance, or get an erection, or, it's hard to have that sort of relaxed flow that you need to be in that state where you can have relaxed and self-aware sexual experiences if you're anxious. People have anxiety for a million different reasons. Anxiety can be like the canary in the coal mine. It can tell you, this situation is not safe for me. I don't feel comfortable. I don't trust this. Or it could just mean I have body image issues, or trauma, or something I got to work through, or I have a narrative about sex that I need to change in my head. Um, the other piece is relationally. Um, I think people have an expectation that sex is just going to fix itself. Like, well, we love each other, we're together, we're in a relationship, and so um, I don't understand why I'm not desirous of my partner. Or, desire and arousal are two different things, and losing desire for a long-term partner just means you've lost desire for the sex that you've been having. And sex is developmental, like it has to change over time. If you don't want to change your partner, you have to change the sex that you're having. And so I think that there's sort of this idea that we neglect our erotic life. And you have to work on your erotic life as much, if not more, than you do your companionship, like your everyday roommate life. Instead of just assuming, well, I love you, so it's supposed to work out. And then I think the last piece is underestimating the impact of our anatomy. Like, you're going to feel different at different times of the month. You're not always going to be turned on in the same way. That erections are not expected. Like, you don't always have to perform. Like, there's medications. Every single medication has a sexual side effect. It just depends on what it is, even over the counter medications. I mean, if you think about like antihistamines, for instance, if you take allergy meds are meant to dry out the soft tissue in your body. So it's going to dry out your vagina. Like, like we don't think about things like that because it doesn't say it on the label. But Propecia for hair loss for men causes erectile dysfunction. Or sometimes orgasmic dysfunction or low desire. Like, everything has a trade-off. If you're on an antidepressant, it can really affect your ability to even want to have sex. So the understanding that, how we feel in our body is arousal, and that's different than desire. You might want to have sex, but the capacity to have sex is affected by a lot of things: what you eat, whether you exercise, if you get sleep. We're not machines, so we have to understand really how our bodies respond. I think we underestimate our online capacity for connection and the ability to sort of outsource your sexual needs online um, because it feels, again, like secrecy. Like, you can cheat on your partner now lying in bed next to them. Like, it's very easy. And 10 years ago that was not a thing. So we're still wrapping our minds around, like, what does it actually mean to be monogamous? What does it mean to be sexual? Like, what does it mean to be in a relationship and be sexual with technology? Like, we're still trying to figure all that out and define that for each other.
Absolutely. It's interesting because obviously where we're from, LiveJasmin, this is, I've interviewed hundreds of members, and one of the things they say they really like about this space is simply that it's a space where they can talk about sex or they can talk about their fantasies. And sometimes actually it's almost like they need that practice with someone, and then once they have a positive experience there, they feel more comfortable and confident to ask their partner if they can try X, Y, and Z. But like you said, those online resources for people to just explore themselves, like you said, there's a lot of secrecy around it, and there's a lot of shame and stigma as well. When you mentioned at the beginning, women really owning their sexuality, I thought of our models who are extremely stigmatized, and they are, in many cases, I'd say 80 to 90, depending on the model, percent of what they do is they listen, which is really interesting. They are listening to people. But some of our models have become millionaires from being on Jasmin. And when they go to buy a house and the bank wants to know what they do, they have that stigma, that backlash, because they're in the adult industry. So now it's like, no, you're not approved for a loan. And there's so many other examples of where like they're facing that societal punishment that we kind of touched on earlier for having anything to do with sexuality.
Oh, please. I've been shut down on social media so many times. And
Have
I'm
you?
a sex therapist. Like they have shut down my Instagram. I'm like shadow banned. I'm like, yeah, just because I say the word sex, just because, my content is about sex therapy or, pleasure or, sexual awakening. Even, you can't say sex. You have to say SEG
Segs.
S or whatever. And they know all the tricks now and they still shut me down.
Oh, they know the tricks now. They figured out segs, SEGGS. They took segs from us.
Yeah, you can't do anything. They know everything now.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. You as a professional, and ultimately your content, I'm sure, is more educational than anything, are not allowed to give that information. I'm curious your thoughts on this phenomena. It seems like, using Instagram as the example, they'll shut down an account like yours. However, I have seen very explicit content on Instagram that is not educational. It is just sexual. And that's okay. So it's very interesting what we're comfortable with and what we're not. Because, we use sex to sell everything, our burgers, our new energy drinks, doesn't really matter. But we are so uncomfortable with actually discussing intimacy or experiencing that even with our partners. What is this? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I don't know. I'm going to interview someone who works for social justice around this kind of issue and like works with Meta to try to figure out what the hell is going on. And I'm going to interview them on my podcast because my podcast is The Trouble with Sex. I mean, this is one of the troubles with sex, like that people can't they have no discernment. Like, and who is making these decisions? Is it like someone, some woman in Texas? I'm sorry, Texas, I don't mean to ban you, but I'm just thinking of these sort of radically right-wing conservative people who are book banning. And I'm like, why pick that book? Like, why pick my site? What? And you're right. I get all these like sort of porn videos on my streaming social media, but they shut me down. Like, I was so fascinated by it. And you have to wonder why. Is it like is it personal? I start getting paranoid. And I'm like, maybe it's someone that's like trying to shut me down. They're canceling me. I don't know.
It's not personal. I hear this from most experts I interview, but yeah.
It's just a weird time. I mean, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before about trying to take power away from women. Like if you rise to the level of any visibility in this field, whatever those forces are going to try to shut you down. I don't hear this from men in the field like I do from women.
What is so threatening about women?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the idea of like put a burqa on it, like cover her up, because even if you see her ankle, she has so much sexual power that she's going to make you cheat on your wife. And so if you see her, you're not going to be able to control yourself. Like that's how our power is going to destroy your monogamous relationship. Like, and we still have that in our heads, right? Like the ads sometimes are like, watch out for that Jezebel-like woman who's going to steal your mate. So funny. Just a little aside. Sometimes I speak at a lot of conferences and stuff, psychotherapy conferences, and every once in a while I'll be at like a reception afterwards or something, and people, these men will say to me, because they know I'm a sex therapist, and they'll be like, oh, you're a sex therapist? They're like, I don't want to sleep with you. I can't sleep with you. I have a wife. I'm married. Like, dude, I don't want to sleep with you either.
Wow.
So there's like assumption that if we do anything in this field, it means that we are, these perpetrating over sexualized Jezebel like women that are going to destroy your marriage. And that is still very prevalent. Like, if you read this book, you are going to turn gay, and you're going to, like, all these misunderstandings about gender and orientation and sexuality that are still so prevalent in our country. And yet, the good news is we do have a very wide open, awake generation that is not tolerant of that. I think coming out of the pandemic, we've realized that, this whole hustle culture and being busy all the time is not really rewarding. What's really rewarding is relationships.
Amen. That is so beautifully said. I literally am going to clip that part of this interview and post it on social media, because I think that it's important to have those reminders that when it's all said and done, you're right. It's not about how hard we hustled. It's about the connections formed. Hustling is not built into our DNA as a need. I know that men with testosterone do have, they hunt, but this hustle thing where we're constantly busy 24/7, that is not a basic human need, but connection is.
And it's a much more feminine superpower. So as our culture moves out of this, like, I'm going to give up my life for 50 years and work for a corporation till I die. And, as a client said to me today, no more working on weekends for pizza. Like, I want to be with my family. And I think that shift to a more, female energetic, whether you're male or female, just that female energy of, I want to relate to people in community more than I want to, be at work. So we have this, let me just riff on this for a second, because I'm
Please.
so passionate about this
Yes.
idea that we only deserve pleasure if we work really hard for it. So you can work all week, and then you can binge on pleasure on the weekend, but then you better get back to work hungover from your pleasure binge. But get back to work and work really hard so that you too can deserve pleasure. And people who are really at the top of the pyramid can have all the pleasure they want, and the helicopters and the sex and the women. But the rest of us, we can maybe take vacations where we just shove in as much pleasure as we can, overdose on pleasure, spend all our money, get drunk, hang out on the beach, have vacation sex, and then get back to work. And that's how our capitalistic society has treated the idea of pleasure, that pleasure is something you have to deserve, instead of, living your life based on what is pleasurable, which many times and most of the time has to do with some kind of connection, whether it's a connection with yourself or other people. It's usually in relating. And if we spent our time and our energy and our direction with pleasure as our focus, as our superpower, then how would we live our lives differently? How less exhausted would we be? How less drained would we feel? And if we had all that energy and we weren't exhausted, we would have the energy to take over the planet. Like, we wouldn't feel so deprived of the energy that we need. We wouldn't feel so burnt out. And I don't know about you, but every woman I know is burnt out. So there's something to that idea of deserving. Like, I deserve self-care. Like, what does that mean? I deserve to get a massage occasionally? Hell yeah. Every day if I need it.
Yeah, and I like that distinction of you don't have to earn this. You just deserve it. Mm-hmm. Period, because you are here. That's why.
Yeah, it's the juice that we run on. Like, that's our, that's the energy that runs through our body all the time. Like, that's our motivation. That's why you and I are talking, like, is to tap into that energy.
The example you gave of, like you said, it doesn't matter if you're male or female. Certain things contain more feminine energy, and we know that relating and relationships fall under feminine energy.
Mhm.
And like you said, if we all started to tap a little bit more into that and prioritize that just a little bit more, there is this healing that takes place, or this rejuvenation. We're less burnt out. And like you said, we could come together and take over the world. And to me, you just very perfectly answered my question of why is there this attack on women specifically when it comes to them feeling good? You know, if we start feeling too good, well, we might start encouraging everyone else to feel good and to focus on relationships and to band together. So I found it. There's the threat. I got it. Makes sense, you know?
Yeah, can you imagine if we were all on the same side and had the energy and weren't exhausted and we could band together? Like, I mean, you know, and that's not to say that all women are like that. Like, I've seen a lot of women with voices that I feel like came from trauma that overly relate to um, the traumatizing factors in our culture. You know, they have this sort of fight, flee, or fawn, like this fawning energy of, oh, I'm right behind you. I think you're so amazing, as they're backing out of the room to protect themselves. They're like, but they have this fawning energy um, around things that are laws and rules and repression that's actually hurting them. And so we can't just generalize that all women should band together and take over, because there's a lot of female voices out there that I'm like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but the result of that is that they are not in relationship, that they push people away. So they have this very, you know, um, clear aura of don't like me, stay away from me, and no one does like that.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting uh, conversation around what is relationship and how do you find your power without exploiting other people or without being mean.
Yeah, 100%. Like what I like to call it is authentic power. Because if you have to exploit other or hurt other people, I don't think that's true power. You know, like true kings, people that are top of the top, are the nicest people. They don't, because they're not in competition. They're the king. They don't need to hurt you and bring you down. They're at the top. And that mentality, you can see it in people that are truly comfortable in themselves. They don't have to exploit and hurt because they're already good. They don't need to, you know. Um,
And women have been taught to compete with each other, so it's really hard to relax and remember that we're all on the same side.
yeah, we are. We are. Yeah. You know, you mentioned about relationships and what does that look like and what does that mean? And you've mentioned the title of one of your books a few times, The New Monogamy. I would like to talk about what that looks like from your perspective. What is the new monogamy? Because this is something that is becoming more and more a hot topic.
Yeah, so I really have seen over the years, you know, a couple of generations of people that have come from homes where there's divorce or infidelity or basically a lack of sort of integrity. And I don't mean a lack of morality, I mean integrity by feeling integrated, so that you're not disintegrated or dismembered or compartmentalizing parts of yourself. You're not saying, you know, I can live this compartmentalized life. I can say I'm monogamous, but I'm really having an affair. Or I can say I'm monogamous, but I'm really sleeping with, you know, someone who makes me happier than you. Like I can live by opening those compartments, integrating all those parts of myself and saying, look, this is who I am. And this is who I need to be. And so monogamy is defined more by integrity and transparency and encouraging each other to be who we need to be to grow spiritually into our fullest selves, instead of this idea that was created by the church 200 years ago that was really about inheriting property. you know, keeping your woman within the fence so that you knew that your offspring was yours so that they could inherit your sheep. Because women don't have to get married anymore to buy sheep. We can buy our own sheep. And we don't need to get married to have life insurance or health insurance or to get a mortgage or to have a child or to have sex. We don't really need to get married anymore. And so marriage today and monogamy today is optional. And so how you work your monogamy is really unique to each person because it's optional, because there's no monogamy prison. Like um, you don't have to follow monogamy the way your grandmother did it. Like you can, in this generation, create a really unique way of relating. And it sort of goes back to what we were saying before. Like, today it's not just I promise to love and honor you until we're dead, but I promise to love, honor you, and tell you every time I send my picture on Snapchat, or every time I go on LiveJasmin, or like, what does monogamy really mean, and how explicit do we need to be? And the last part I'll say about that is that I think monogamy is on a continuum. So what might be, monogamy for you might be, well, we should tell each other every time we have a fantasy about someone else, or every time we masturbate, or every time we flirt with someone. But your partner might be like, I don't think that's necessary. That's like in my head, and I'm not really touching anyone, so it's fine. Whereas other people moving up the continuum might feel like, well, I can have sex with someone online. It's not really cheating. And somebody else might think, well, as long as we don't have like an emotional romantic connection, let's have sex with other people. Let's do it together. That sounds fun. Like we can be up and down the monogamy continuum as long as we're honest with each other. Like, what is it that we actually want? And so that's what I think of as open monogamy. It's an agreement about how we want to define our commitment to each other.
I love that. I absolutely love that because it gives people back the option of being integral and honest, and it gives them the space to evolve and be authentic to themselves and to their partner. And there are plenty of people, as we know, this is why we even need to have this discussion and define these things. Many people are monogamous, but they're lying and they're cheating and they're having all kinds of, and there's deceit there. Whereas if they could find a partner that would accept them for what it is they want, and that person they accept each other. Mm-hmm. Then I like how you said this is the new monogamy, because it may not be what we have considered monogamy classically, but you're in agreement. And so it is, you're on the same page and you're committed to that, to that agreement, and giving the space for that agreement to evolve as you evolve. I can't stand this idea that human beings are one-dimensional and we never change. Where did that idea come from? We are super complex, multi-dimensional, and I hope we're all changing and evolving.
Important note to make, just, knowing that who you are when you first get in a relationship is not who you are a year after, 10 years after, 25 years after. Like, your sex life will change and your monogamy agreement will change. And I think instead of trading each other in for somebody else, when we, decide, okay, this has come to completion, or, we've completed our marriage or whatever, I think instead of trading each other in, we're deciding, maybe I'm not with the wrong person, but I have the wrong agreement. And it's much easier to change the agreement than it is to change the person. Trust me.
Have you ever had patients or clients that do use camming services, and what your thoughts are on them?
Yeah, I don't have anything against a camming service or any kind of online connection that people have. The only problem I foresee is when people use it to exit their relationship and not talk to their partner about what they want or need. And so they're sort of avoiding the conflict of saying, I'd really like to do this with you, or I'd really like this from you. And so sometimes it can be an avoidance. But I think the positive sides are that, it can be an arousal technique that you can then bring home to your partner. So we're all in charge of our arousal. Like I'm in charge of what turns me on and what turns me off. And you're in charge of what turns you on and what turns you off. And then we come together on the bridge of our relationship. And so Elizabeth Taylor used to say, you go out and have your appetizers, but come home for dinner. I mean, she was
Wow, I like that.
married
And
like 7 times, so I don't
yeah,
know. That's
I mean, she knew how to catch them and get them, you know what I mean? So maybe there's something to that. I'm gonna have to think about that more.
exactly. But the idea is like, if you get aroused outside of your relationship or find connection or safety, I would want to know why and what you're looking for. And I would want to know, can you do it with your partner? And also, who do you become when you're with these other people online? Like, I think that we don't necessarily look for another person, we look to be another person. And so, who are you trying to try on in yourself with these other people?
Yeah, you really touched on something that is a key component of why many members are on the site, in that they feel like with the models who don't know anyone that knows them and who don't, they're non-biased, that they can open up these other sides of themselves because they can just exit out if they don't like the experience with the model. It's very safe. There's no judgment. And even if there was, you don't have any ties to them. So it's okay. It doesn't hurt as much.
Right.
So many members do then experience the safety to, like you said, either become someone else or to show a very hidden part of themselves.
Yeah, and I imagine that for some people, to try on that persona or that part of themselves or try on that fantasy, it's sort of a testing ground.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it could be safe. I mean, you're not out at a bar and you're not trawling in the neighborhood, like you're online. It could be a really safe way to establish those relationships.
Absolutely. It's definitely physically completely safe.
Mm-hmm.
My final question to you is, from your incredible experience and perspective, what do you think are the key next steps in us building a more sexually well society?
Mm. I think it's really, tackling. I mean, this is such a broad topic, but tackling the shame that comes from um, the sexual trauma that is inherent in our culture. Like, there is so much trauma. I don't know anyone who hasn't had some kind of traumatic experience around sexuality, whether it's like unwanted, non-consensual, even an approach, like somebody grabbing you in a bar or something. Like I think for women and for a lot of men, which we don't talk about, straight and gay, they've had a lot of unwanted sexual experiences. And when those experiences are not processed, not talked about, and not integrated, they sort of get stuck in you as a traumatic experience. Now, some people have much more intense traumatic experiences, sexual assaults and rapes, and others might have more abbreviated experiences, but they're not processed. And so, I think we need to help women and men have a voice around what that experience is like. And I think it's not just naming our perpetrators and sending people to jail. I don't think that's quite it. I think it's understanding how we've created this culture where people do perpetrate. Like what is happening around this shadow part of our world around sexuality, because it's a shadow in all of us, and it's a shadow that has to be brought into the light to heal.
Very well said. Very beautifully said. Yeah. As you were talking and you mentioned the shadow, I was like, aha, maybe somewhere else that people that are really deep into psychology, why this kind of spiritual component comes in is, people like Carl Jung were very spiritual and taught in a very spiritual archetypal way. And so I guess the fathers and grandfathers of, some of these professions actually themselves had very spiritual teachings and tendencies. So that could also be how it floods into.
Maybe. I mean, I think some of us are drawn to be healers, and because we were wounded ourselves, like I had a fucked up childhood, like a lot of therapists have had, and we become therapists to learn to heal ourselves and figure out our family situations. And then because of that empathy and that sensitivity, we understand where people's pain comes from, not just from an intellectual place, but from a human place.
Yes, absolutely. This has been a beautiful interview. I know you have to run. Is there anything else about human sexuality, your work, connection that we didn't touch on, but you just feel inspired to share?
I'm just curious about your site. Do you have men and male models on your site too?
We do have male models, yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how the transition is to embrace eroticism for women, and is there a place for, I know there's a lot more like feminist porn and feminist porn production and more women in the industry. And so I was just wondering if it was like shifting in your industry as well, and if more women were, like more women are joining places like Ashley Madison. And I'm just wondering if there was a space for that, if women are stepping into that or not. I was just curious.
To be honest with you, I'm curious about that myself. The space is there,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know exactly how many women are stepping in and taking ownership and exploring in that way. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think in general, we are, women tend to be the ones that are least encouraged to explore in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's another conversation for another time, I guess.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And if you have any listeners that want to connect, I'm happy to send a monogamy agreement questionnaire, like 10 questions to ask your partner to start the conversation. I'm just trying to think of like what I can give them for free. Yeah, I'm happy to send that to anyone who wants to get in touch with me. If they want to go through my website and just email me or send it to Tammy at Dr. Tammy Nelson, drtammynelson.com, and just say they heard me through you, I can send them a monogamy agreement, or you can post it on your site, whatever works for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll put that in the description of our interview.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thank you.